So starting with the origin, just what exactly is the origin of Judaism? Like, how did it come about?
I mean, it's kind of a tricky question, but that's okay. I mean, obviously we base ourselves on the right book on the Bible, which we call a Tanakh. It's been a sacred book, a book we look to in existence. It's probably existed in its current form for somewhere between 2,500 to 2,000 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, yeah. So, some of the first historical evidence that we have of Jews, particularly right in the land of Israel, is between there also. I'd say kind of between 2,500 to 3,000 years old. It dates back to so one key date that we know that the first temple was destroyed in 586 BCE. So somewhere in the kind of 400 to 500 years before then, we think is really when kind of Judaism took hold and kind of became a religion, a culture, a people in the land of Israel, and then kind of without getting into all of the history, let's say the other kind of key point was when the second temple was destroyed, which was in the year 70 CE, and because that was a key point, because then the focus of the religion really shifted from doing things in the temple and doing sacrifices and all sorts of things like that to what we would call now rabbinic Judaism, which is much more what we're used to today, focusing on praying instead of sacrificing, on observing things in your home, observing things in your synagogue. So that I think is another big shift for when it developed.
The core beliefs and values of Judaism.
So I'd say, one is belief in one God. I'd say it's right. It's monotheism. I think it's a belief in Hebrew phrase is kedusha for holiness, and we try to be holy as people because God is holy as well. Now, what does it mean to be holy? There are a few spots in the Torah where that kind of comes across. One in particular where it talks about, just trying to be ethical and be good people, be good human beings, and try to take care of each other. And I think we view those things as mitzvot. So, the word mitzvah, which a lot of times we use to mean kind of do a mitzvah is doing a good deed. So the word mitzvah itself actually is commandment. So we really do view that as as part of our ways of in part of our relationship with God. In that we take these mitzvot, we take these commandments on ourselves as ways of, as we think, trying to live a holy life, to observe holidays, to I think to try to find ways of bringing holy moments into everything that we do, and into how we treat people around us. I think that's a big piece as well. There's an idea that the Jews are the chosen people, and chosen to be in Hebrew the phrase is or lagoyim, which is a light unto the nations. So hopefully that we can be an example for other people around us of how to live, how to celebrate, and ideally how to be holy.
In my nefesh,
okay, right.
Going into that a little bit.
Sure. So pikuach nefesh is the phrase that means saving a life, and that's seen as taking the first priority. So for example, we know that a traditional Jewish person might not drive in a car on Shabbat, or they might not might not make a phone call on Shabbat. But if you're ever in a situation where life is at risk, without hesitating, we're supposed to violate Shabbat in order to save a life. So that came up a lot in the last 2 years regarding COVID. Whereas ordinarily, we wouldn't, I wouldn't have a laptop with me on the bima, during Shabbat services. We wouldn't count, 10 people on Zoom as being physically present. But for the sake of pikuach nefesh, for the sake of preserving a life and protecting lives, we're able to, adjust some of our practices.
So I heard you mention Passover before. Would you mind, in like a general overview of the story, would you mind going into a little more depth?
Sure. So, right, Passover celebrates the exodus from Egypt. In Hebrew, we say that's the Yitziat Mitzrayim. And, we read about the story, we read about the narrative that's in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, and really celebrates our journey from slavery into freedom. There's a few phrases that come up over and over again in the Haggadah that we use at the Seder, that we go from darkness to light, from subjugation to freedom, or from subjugation to redemption, from slavery to freedom. With this, then I think that's kind of our long goal, our long time journey, is that to think just like we came from these moments of darkness to eventually come out on the other side as free people and into a world of light, and to be able to have our own destiny, to be able to set our own goals and practices and create society as we want. That's what we want for other people also, to be able to experience that as well. So I think it's all about the journey of from slavery to freedom, from Egypt to Israel, from Egypt to the Promised Land, and I think in some ways it's also the moment when we went from being just this collection of people to then having just a core identity, and really kind of giving us that Jewish identity of having come out of Egypt.
Okay. So how is Passover, specifically in America, celebrated both culturally and religiously?
So one of the big celebrations is what we eat on Passover, or more specifically, what we don't eat. So it's a tradition that we don't eat bread. We don't eat Hebrew it's chametz, or any leavened products, any bread products that have rised. I'm not sure. Rose could be rose. Yeah. The thought is that when the Israelites were leaving Egypt, it says this in the Torah, that they did not have enough time for the bread to rise, so they ate matzah, which is then food that didn't rise, and so would only be cooked had to be cooked quickly. We also call matzah sometimes the bread of affliction, is that this is a bread that we ate in slavery. But now that we're free, we're able to eat more than just that. So I think both people who don't eat bread, people who make a point of eating matzah for all or part of the holiday, and I think another big piece is the Seder. So the Seder here in America, there are 2 Seders each of the first 2 nights, and they're big, generally family celebrations. People come together to, I think, retell and reenact the story of Passover, of coming out of Egypt. There are a lot of symbolic foods that we eat as part of it. Matzah is one of them. And I think what's so effective about the Seder is that it's, generally speaking, right in your home with people you care about. And I like to think there's also something for everyone in it, in that it's, for people who want to relate to just the story and tradition and history, it's there. People who like to sing and like music, there are a lot of songs to sing. People who do like good food, there's good food to eat. And I think there's a lot of that symbolism there, where you can really, we say, we're tasting the bitter herbs to remind us of the bitterness of slavery. So I really think just from an educational perspective, really carries a lot of those. It's put together very well as a way of just making memories for people.
Okay. So moving on to another holiday, Rosh Hashanah. Sort of what exactly is the purpose of the holiday? Like Passover's purpose is to remind us that we were slaves and now we're free. What is Rosh Hashanah's?
So we say Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the new year. There are actually a few different names for Rosh Hashanah. So one is Rosh Hashanah, which literally means the new year. It's also known as Yom Teruah, which is kind of the day of sounding the shofar up there. And that's kind of one of our symbols of the new year. That shofar, basically is a primitive musical instrument, an ancient one, but it kind of, calls out the sound. It's the new year. We're getting ready. We're preparing ourselves. And I think then it's also a day for for just a lot for introspection and kind of looking at ourselves, a time to take account of, how were we as people, as a community in the past year, and how do we want to improve in the year ahead. There's the tradition that really links Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur together. We say in the liturgy, Berosh Hashanah yikatevun, v'yom tzom Kippur yichatemun. That on Rosh Hashanah our fate for the new year is written down, and there's an image that comes out of the Machzor, comes out of the High Holiday Prayer Book, of God sitting on the throne, and we're each going before God to have our fate determined for the year ahead. And we hope that we are written down on Rosh Hashanah. We're written down in the Book of Life for a happy and healthy year in the year ahead. And then that fate is then sealed and finalized on Yom Kippur, which is 10 days later.
It's a pretty good segue, I guess.
Yeah.
Because Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah are pretty linked, so
right.
It's like you can't have one.
Absolutely.
So if Rosh Hashanah is like writing us down in the Book of Life, then Yom Kippur is like, it's like the closing of that, sort of?
Pretty much.
That's its purpose?
I'd say so. We call Yom Kippur in English the Day of Atonement. What does atonement mean? When we're saying we're sorry, we're seeking forgiveness. One of the big pieces on Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur is a day when we fast, we don't eat, we don't drink. Many people stay in the synagogue, stay in service pretty much all day. It's a day for reflection, a day for prayer. And one of the key pieces in the prayers we say is the confessional section, where we admit to all the things that we might have done wrong in the year gone by. And we do a lot of that communally, for all of us together. The idea is that we're supporting each other. We're not trying to embarrass anyone and say, oh, I can't believe he did this, or I can't believe she did that. But we're all standing together as one community, saying, here are all the places where we might have fallen short, here are all the places where we could strive to do better. And we say that by doing that, we're admitting our mistakes, which is part of trying to do better. And we hope that by doing all that, at the end of the day, our fate is sealed, and then we're all set for the year ahead. And
so is that the Tashlich ceremony, or is that like kind of both?
So Tashlich is a ritual that a lot of people do on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. It's actually up to the first day of Rosh Hashanah. It's a ritual that is usually done between the two holidays, where the tradition is that we go stand by a body of water, and then Tashlich in Hebrew means kind of casting out. And so customary use breadcrumbs, and we cast them out into the water. The idea being also that we're casting out our mistakes, our wrongdoings, our sins, and we're getting rid of them. I think as part of preparing for the new year, as part of seeking forgiveness, it's both for us to admit what we've done wrong and to recognize that, and to realize where the mistakes were, and to try to clean ourselves from them. And so that's why I think the role of water comes in. Water is seen as something that is pure, that helps purify us. And so we cast out our symbolic mistakes into the water as we're hoping to kind of cleanse ourselves for the new year.
So are there any other ceremonies or ways to celebrate for Rosh Hashanah?
So Rosh Hashanah, also has a lot of festive meals associated with it. People traditionally gather together with family, sometimes with friends, nighttime, during the day, after services as well. There are also symbolic foods we eat on Rosh Hashanah. So one common symbol that we might not think about is so we have challah. We have challah, every week on Shabbat, but on Rosh Hashanah it's a round challah, symbolizing that the year is a circle. It's a cycle of life. It's a cycle of each year. A common symbol is eating apples and honey, just as we're wishing for a sweet new year. And there actually is a whole tradition that is not as commonly celebrated, of a Rosh Hashanah Seder also. So just like there's a Passover Seder, where we eat a lot of different symbolic foods, there's a whole series of other symbolic foods that people eat on Rosh Hashanah. So apples and honey is one of them, but there are other things like a lot of them have to do with kind of puns in Hebrew, where it's like I'm trying to think of a good example.
I've heard of some people have a fish head.
So that's one of them. So the ideas are right. Rosh literally means head. So it's kind of the same idea as that. You have a fish head. You should be like the head of the fish and not the tail. You want to be a leader, not a follower. There's ones like that. There's one where in Hebrew, the word for decree in Hebrew is very similar to the word for carrot. Gazar, kra roa gzar dinenu. We should hopefully God will avert the harshness of our decree, but it sounds in Hebrew gezer is carrot. So then the people eat carrots with a symbol there too, and there are a few other.
And so I know Yom Kippur is not celebrated, obviously.
Right.
I understand that, but how is it observed beyond just praying all day?
Right.
Are there any other?
So right, the big ones is Yom Kippur is seen as a fast day. The thought behind that is that it's a day when we're much more focused on our spiritual selves than our physical selves, and we try to live as if we're focused only on the spiritual side of things. So taking care of things like food and drink. There are people who won't people who won't like shower or won't take baths on Yom Kippur. There's some people who won't wear like leather shoes. Like wearing leather shoes were seen during older times as like a sign of comfort and luxury. So people won't wear leather shoes as a way of saying I'm not thinking about the fancy things today. I'm just trying to be simple. So it's customary for me as a rabbi in the cantor, and in some communities, like more people also will like wear like totally white, just as a way of again signifying just basic simple things. Like I wear a white robe. I can show you if you want. If you need to see it, it's a white robe. Just as again trying to present ourselves as being pure, as being simple, as just focusing on the words we're saying, on how we're living, not as much on how we look on that day.
And then for the breakfast meal, I know what my family does.
Okay.
But like we do bagels most of the time.
Right.
I just want to know like what is that common?
I think that's common. That's I think more of the cultural celebration.
Yeah.
Is that it's the first meal you're eating in the day, so what's better than bagels? But I think there's not really like a tradition of what to have for that as part of the meal.
That's more of like an American thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
There is an interesting tradition, so that, right, so after Yom Kippur, Sukkot, another holiday, is only 5 days later. Right, Yom Kippur is the 10th of the month, Sukkot is the 15th of the month, and so some people have a tradition that they're so excited for the next holiday that they make a point of like doing something to start building the sukkah right away. So even after Yom Kippur, as part of the break fast, people will start, just start to build the sukkah. That can look like a few different things, but it is, I think, kind of an interesting tradition for the break fast as well.
Obviously Passover has like a story behind it. That's like, I guess, I don't want to say that's its whole thing, but
right.
Like it's a big part of it is the story. Do Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur have any stories associated with them?
So yes and no. So I think you said right. So Passover celebrates the story itself. Like that's the background for it. We say it's based off of a historical event in theory, and that's why do we observe Passover? Because we came out of Egypt. So because that's what happened. So it's not quite the same thing for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So it's not quite the same to say we observe Rosh Hashanah because our ancestors did this or that. It's more so just because this is the new year, and all cultures celebrate their new years and recognize it that way. And likewise on Yom Kippur, it's just been seen as kind of like this day of Day of Atonement, Day of Prayer, Day of Judgment. Now there are stories that have become associated with each of the holidays. So we do say that Rosh Hashanah is the birthday of the world. So we say it's the anniversary of creation. So according to the Torah, We say God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. So we do say that began on Rosh Hashanah. That was, the very beginning of the first year was that. Now, getting the science behind that is another conversation, which we can go to. We can go to another time. But that's is one of the stories that we summarize on Rosh Hashanah. But there are a lot of stories about people observing Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There's a story of a rabbi who, leading up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, like every day, he would, go out of town. He would go somewhere else, go out into the woods, and people had no idea where he was going. And then it turns out he was going to, people were wondering, said, he must go to heaven to try to, to prepare for the holiday. He was so holy, he goes up to heaven before the holidays. And then someone goes and follows him, and it turns out he was going to a poor old woman who lived on the outskirts of town, and every day would chop wood and would build a fire for her to make sure she would be warm and have food and food to eat and water to drink. And the story is that he didn't go to heaven; he went even higher. So there's a story like that. There's stories similar to that about people observing Yom Kippur. People observing these holidays in tragic times. There's stories of people observing them during the Holocaust in ghettos and concentration camps. And there are other kind of legends like that of what was this rabbi doing, what was this person doing on Yom Kippur, but it's not as much like a historical story behind it.
Does Judaism have a concept of heaven? Yes, and no. But that always seems to be the answer.
It is for a lot. So I think yes. There are definitely conversations about, in Hebrew, the phrase is olam haba, of the world to come. Now it's not exactly the same image that other cultures might think of. Oh, if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. But there are definitely conversations that we try to be a good person, and good people earn their place in the world to come. And there are a few instances where it lists out, for people who did this wrong, they lose their spot in the world to come.
So it's like an afterlife, just a general afterlife.
I think so. Okay. I think that's kind of a safe bet. Now, depending on, there's a lot of Jewish history, there's a lot of Jewish literature and culture. So depending on which era of that, some people kind of look to them more and other times less. But I think that idea definitely is prevalent, that there is a world to come.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you could. You learned something about it.
Yeah. That is the end of my questions.
Okay.
So if you have any additional comments about anything we talked about.
I don't know. It's a lot to cover.
It is.
It's right. Right. You can learn all of these things and try to present all of Judaism, or in however long the presentation is tough. But I think these are some of kind of the big highlights for it. I think so there is a story that comes from the Talmud, comes from these rabbinic legends of someone who goes and wants to, he tries to challenge a few different rabbis and tries to say, can you teach me the whole Torah while standing on one foot? And he goes to one rabbi who says, no way, get out of here, there's no way to do that. Then he goes to another rabbi who says, sure. And all he says to him is, ve'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha, is love your neighbor as yourself. That's one of the mitzvot, that's one of the commandments that comes from, talks about what it is to be holy, that comes from the Torah, from the book of Leviticus. He says, love your neighbor as yourself. The rest is all details. Now go and learn. So I think in a lot of ways, that's a good lesson and a good reminder, is that, so the important ways are how we treat each other, how we live as people, how we interact with the people around us. And that's in some ways the core piece of it. And yes, there are a lot of details, and we shouldn't ignore all the details. We should try to learn them, try to incorporate them in these celebrations, these practices as part of our lives. But those are the details. But the big ideas are there. So I just think that's kind of was a good summary, a good overview of what it's all about. I think for a lot of people.
It's a good story.
Yeah. Happy to do it. If you need any more help as it's coming on, feel free to let me know. Any more questions, you can